Today we're going to talk about a car that is rightfully considered one of the greatest luxury icons in the history of American automotive manufacturing, and this is the beautiful 1956 Cadillac Fleetwood 60 Special, a car that was created at a time when Cadillac truly was the world standard of luxury and prestige. The 60 Special represented the top-of-the-line four-door sedan in the Cadillac lineup, available for purchase in that particular year, and it was a car that embodied absolutely everything the brand could offer to its most discerning customers. When we talk about 1956, it's important to understand the context of that time because it was the golden era of American automotive manufacturing, a period when designers and engineers were not constrained by considerations of fuel economy or environmental regulations and could create cars that were maximally expressive, luxurious, and technologically advanced. The Cadillac model range in 1956 was truly impressive, including the Series 62 at the lower end of the lineup, the DeVille Series, the Fleetwood 60 Special itself, the Series 75, and of course, the legendary Eldorado and Eldorado Seville. So a buyer who wanted to purchase a Cadillac had a truly wide selection of models for any taste and budget. But it was the 60 Special that occupied a special place in this hierarchy, because it combined the prestige, comfort, and drivability of a four-door sedan with exclusive trim details and special design solutions. Between the 1955 and 1956 model years, significant changes occurred in design, which was typical for that time when automakers annually made substantial modifications to their models. And we should start with a discussion of the front of the car, because this is where the most dramatic changes in styling occurred. It's important to remember that the designer's credo at that time was longer, lower, and wider, and this philosophy continued to dominate until the mid to late 1970s. But in 1956, the motto was longer, lower, wider, and this is exactly what designers were striving to achieve. The front of the 1956 Cadillac has numerous styling elements specifically designed to embody this philosophy. The first thing Cadillac designers did was significantly widen the crest emblem and the V-shaped element beneath it compared to the 1955 model to emphasize the overall width of the vehicle. The grille texture became much finer on the 1956 models, although it retained the same egg crate structure as in 1955, but became more refined, and this helps give the car visually more width. The third thing designers did was add distinctive rib sections above each headlamp. These eyebrows have horizontal ribs that give the headlamp area a bit more width, and the horizontal nature of these ribs emphasizes the car's width. The section above the headlamp on each side now became flatter. The same applies to the hood, which also became flatter, and the so-called nose of the hood became wider on the 1956 model compared to 1955. The bumper guards, the so-called dagmars, were moved further from center, and the parking lights, or fog lamps, were moved lower and further from center compared to the 1955 models. There were numerous visual elements that designers incorporated into the front of the car to give it the appearance of greater width. And of course, they added the beautiful Cadillac script to the grille. By the way, the grille could be gold. This was an option on all models except the Eldorado, where the gold grille was standard, or more precisely, available at no extra charge, while on all other models for a small surcharge. When we look at the rear three-quarter view of the 1956 60 Special, we notice several other interesting details. First, on the fender, there is not only the Cadillac crest, but also the inscription beneath it, 60 Special, which designated the series name, and if this were a DeVille or Coupe DeVille, there would be the corresponding inscription. But if you bought the Series 62, meaning the entry-level model, you only got the crest without the inscription. In addition, the Fleetwood 60 Special had a characteristic tubular shape on the rear quarter panel, these ribs that go backward and almost touch the bumper, and this tubular shape was outlined in chrome on the 60 Special, while on less expensive models it was not outlined in chrome, although the shape itself was present. Also for 1956, a very thin chrome strip appeared at the top of the rear quarter panel, which was not there on 1955 models, and it sort of connected the entire side with the fake vent on the rear door and with the molding that ran along the lower part of the car, creating a rather interesting line, almost like the mark of Zorro on your Cadillac. A pretty cool design feature, and an interesting fact is that this vent on the rear door would be copied by Cadillac when they introduced the 1971 Eldorado. Designers drew inspiration from precisely this detail of the 60 Special. Also note that the rear fins are slightly canted forward on this particular Cadillac model, and this together with the overall style of the car helped give the car some appearance of motion, even when it was standing still, and this was emphasized by that tubular surface I mentioned earlier. Designers would become more advanced in creating cars with the appearance of motion in the 1960s, but for that time, it was quite advanced to have these forward canted fins, which gave the car an appearance as if it was simply leaping forward. Since this is a Cadillac, it must have some interesting features and tricks. One such feature that had existed on Cadillacs for several years is that if you lift the driver's side tail lamp, the fuel filler neck is located there. This car has no fuel filler door. It's hidden under the tail lamp. General Motors did this on a number of cars throughout the 1950s and early 1960s. I suppose they did this because then you could fuel from either side relatively easily. But in this case, fueling was done from the driver's side, and the fuel cap and filler neck were nicely hidden under the tail lamp. When we look at the rear view, we see the overall bulbous shape of the car. The sharp, faceted forms of the 1960s had not yet come into fashion. But you see some elements of this with that chrome strip that runs along the top of the rear quarter panel, forming a distinct crease. The chief designer at Cadillac at that time was Bill Mitchell, who would later head General Motors design from 1959 all the way through 1977, and he was a big fan of such fine creases, especially on Cadillacs. And you can begin to see some elements of this here. Designers tried to emphasize width by changing the V-shaped element that sits beneath the Fleetwood script. The V became wider and more tapered to give greater width at the rear. I must also mention the exhaust pipe coming out of the bumper. In some cases, this could lead to bumper corrosion, but you know what? It looks magnificent. The side view shows this image of motion. The rear fins canted forward, the eyebrow above the headlamp is pulled forward, and it's angled backward, especially at the top of the beltline molding, so you get some sense of motion, and of course you have that tubular surface on the rear quarter panel. Although I must say that the 1956 Fleetwood 60 Special didn't actually sell very well. Less than 20,000 units were sold, which for Cadillac of that time was not that much. But this doesn't diminish the fact that the car was an absolute masterpiece of design and engineering. Now let's turn to the interior, because this is another area where Cadillac truly was the world standard at that time. Look at how beautiful the interior is, and the dashboard demonstrates an early example of how the panel wraps into the doors. And notice the tight gaps and good fitment between the top of the instrument panel and the top of the door. They couldn't do this as well decades later, but somehow they managed to do this in 1956. On the trim of the dashboard and doors, there is a small egg crate pattern, similar to what we discussed on the front of the car with the grille pattern. Some cars were equipped with an automatic headlamp dimmer. This is that big thing on the driver's side of the instrument panel that senses oncoming headlights and then dims the headlights accordingly. The door panels deserve special attention, because if you look at the lower part of the door, you have this beautiful pleated fabric with 1 1/4 inch pleats. And new for 1956 was that bright trim element that spans the pleats with the embedded Cadillac crest, just to add a bit more elegance. Notice the soft, full-width armrest with genuine stitching, and the upper part of the door panels was also soft to the touch, in a material that Cadillac called Elasco Fab, a pleasant 1950s name for a soft synthetic material covering the upper part of the door panel. Overall, the interiors on these cars were very richly detailed and expensive to produce. Cars with air conditioning had peculiar translucent tubes in the back, on the shelf under the rear window. In those days, air conditioning was delivered through the headliner. You can see the vents above the door. The air conditioning unit itself was also in the back. The compressor was up front, but the evaporator, fans, and everything else were in the trunk, and it blew cold air from the back into the headliner. and air came out of those vents. This was not a bad idea since cold air sinks, and I think it was just more expensive to do it this way than to simply have vents in the dashboard and the evaporator up front. So Cadillac switched to this several years later. Of course, Chrysler with its Imperial lineup offered front and rear air conditioners all the way through the 1973 model year. So they took this idea of the rear air conditioner and supplemented it with a front evaporator. Before moving on to discussing the engine, let's talk a bit about the dashboard and transmission selector. Cadillac had the Hydra-Matic transmission, which was developed jointly by Cadillac and Oldsmobile, and one of the great features was that it was very reliable, was proven during World War II, used in military equipment of that time, and it was a rugged 4-speed automatic transmission. New for 1956, if you notice in the far left position of the selector was a park position, which did not exist before on Cadillacs until 1956. Often with the Hydra-Matic you would put it in reverse, then turn off the key, and this engaged park, or you would engage the parking brake. But now there was an official park position. Notice that reverse is located at the very end of the selector on this Hydra-Matic. This was before they standardized the selector. Now let's talk about what's under the hood of these cars. And there were 2 engines available for Cadillacs in 1956. This was the first year for the 365 cubic inch V8 from Cadillac. Cadillac engineers increased the displacement of their V8 from 331 cubic inches to 365. And at that time, Cadillac was truly making advances in power. Almost every year the power was increasing. This year, the Eldorado V8 engine with 3 2-barrel carburetors was rated at 305 horsepower. The standard engine with a 4-barrel carburetor was rated at 285 horsepower. So you had a quite powerful V8 in your Cadillac, especially for that time. Not only did the car look good, it had a very powerful and smooth V8 engine under the hood to propel drivers with speed that was more than they expected. Many of these cars had power steering. This is the big pump up front on the driver's side. They had air conditioning. This is the compressor on the passenger side. Then there's an oil filter behind the power steering pump. Then an electric windshield washer and washer fluid reservoir mounted near the firewall. So numerous different accessories on Cadillacs at that time. The Hydra-Matic transmission was also revised in addition to the added park position for 1956. There were slightly different gear ratios, a slightly taller first gear, a slightly taller second gear, third and fourth gears were the same. They changed the mechanical operation of the transmission so it became smoother in 1956. So overall, a number of incremental improvements were made. What made the 60 Special truly special in the context of its time, and why this car became an icon of luxury that still evokes admiration, is the combination of absolutely all factors: visual magnificence, technical perfection, unsurpassed quality of materials and trim, attention to the smallest details, and of course the fact that owning such a car meant you had reached the top of the social ladder. Because Cadillac in the 1950s was not just a car, it was a statement of status. It was a symbol of success. And especially the Fleetwood 60 Special, which stood above regular models but remained a practical 4-door sedan. Unlike the more extravagant Eldorado, so this was a car for serious people, for those who valued quality and prestige, but didn't want the excessive showiness of sports models. Every detail of this car was carefully thought out and executed at the highest level. From the width of the crest on the grille to the pleating of the fabric on the door panels, from the angle of the rear fins to the placement of the exhaust pipe in the bumper, all of this came together as a unified whole, creating a car that was more than just a means of transportation. It was a moving monument to the American dream, the embodiment of the idea that hard work and success should be rewarded with something truly special and luxurious. It's also interesting to note that despite relatively modest sales by mass model standards, the 60 Special retained its value and prestige precisely because of its exclusivity. Because not everyone could afford such a car, and this made it even more desirable for those who could, creating an effect in the perception of brand prestige. The design philosophy of longer, lower, and wider was not just a marketing slogan. It was a real strategy for creating cars that looked majestic and imposing on the road. and the 60 Special embodied this philosophy in every centimeter of its construction, from the wide grille to the sprawling rear fenders with fins. Technical innovations, such as adding the park position on the gear selector or improved gear ratios in the transmission, may seem like small details, but it was precisely such incremental improvements year after year that made Cadillac the industry leader and allowed the company to maintain its reputation as the creator of the world's finest automobiles. The 365 cubic inch V8 engine was a true marvel of engineering for its time, providing smooth and powerful operation that perfectly matched the luxurious character of the car. And the fact that Cadillac continued to increase power year after year shows that the company was not resting on its laurels, but constantly striving for perfection. The air conditioning system, although installed in the trunk, which today may seem like a strange solution, actually demonstrates Cadillac's willingness to invest in the comfort of its customers, even if it required complex and expensive engineering solutions. And the fact that cold air was delivered through the ceiling made sense from a physics standpoint and provided more even cooling of the cabin. The interior of the 60 Special was a place where luxury manifested itself in full measure. Every surface that passengers could touch was covered with quality materials, whether soft leather, pleated fabric, or the synthetic Elasco-Fab, which sounded modern and innovative for the 1950s. And even such details as genuine stitching on the armrests or the Cadillac crest on the chrome trim of the door panels showed a level of attention to detail that is rarely found in modern automotive manufacturing. The dashboard, with its streamlined design and integration with the door panels, was not only functional, but also visually impressive, creating a sense of unified space in which the driver and passengers felt surrounded by luxury from all sides. The hidden fuel filler neck under the tail lamp was another example of how Cadillac thought about every detail and strived to make the car not only beautiful, but also convenient to use, eliminating the need for a separate door that could disrupt the clean lines of the body. The rear fins, canted forward, were not just a stylistic decoration, they created a visual sense of motion and speed even when the car was standing still, and this was part of the overall design strategy aimed at creating cars that looked dynamic and modern. Cars of the future that embodied the optimism and faith in progress characteristic of 1950s America. The chrome details with which the car was generously adorned, from the grille to the moldings on the doors and window frames, were not just decoration, they served to emphasize the lines of the car, to create visual contrast, and to add a sense of preciousness and exclusivity. Because chrome at that time was an expensive material, and its abundant use was itself a statement of luxury. The tubular shape on the rear fenders, outlined in chrome specifically on the 60 Special, was another detail that distinguished this car from less expensive models in the lineup, showing that even within a single brand, there was a clear hierarchy, and those who chose the 60 Special received additional touches of luxury and exclusivity. The color schemes and trim options available for the 60 Special were carefully selected to emphasize the luxurious character of the car, and buyers could choose from a wide range of body and interior color combinations, allowing them to create a car that perfectly matched their personal taste and status. The gold grille, available for an extra charge, was another way for owners to distinguish their car and show that they chose not just a standard model, but something truly special and individual. Despite the fact that 60 Special sales were relatively modest compared to more mass-market models, it was precisely this exclusivity that made the car legendary. Because it was not a car for everyone, it was a car for the select few, for those who truly valued quality, craftsmanship, and prestige, and who were willing to pay a premium price for these qualities. Today, nearly 70 years after its release, the 1956 Cadillac Fleetwood 60 Special remains an icon of luxury and a symbol of the golden era of American automotive manufacturing, a car that reminds us of a time when cars were created not just as transportation, but as works of art, as expressions of craftsmanship and ambition, and as symbols of the American dream of prosperity and success.